Hey guys, Otaku here, and welcome back to another tier list video. So Age of Overlord is finally upon us. It will be out in a mere amount of days as of recording this video, that is. And the format isn't changing a whole lot. It's primarily the format we're currently in with some extra additions and some decks kind of moving around. But before we actually get into the video, make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel. So many of you that watch my videos are not actually subscribed. If you like competitive kind of content or discussion, then this is the place to be. So definitely leave a subscribe. We just broke 1,500 subscribers, and let's shoot for 2,000 before Christmas, shall we? But yeah, let's get right into it. So to start, let's go over the tiers real quick. We got tier 1. These are the decks that you are going to be building to beat when you go to regionals, nationals, and probably worlds. Obviously, you know, we're a ways away from that, so the format will change several times before we get there. But these are the decks that you're going to definitely be side decking and preparing for when you go to formats. These are going to most likely be like the best decks in the format. Tier 1.5, these are decks that have potential. I didn't do 1.5 in the last tier list videos, but I've been seeing everyone else kind of do it, and I liked the idea where like these are decks that could be tier 1. However, they do lose to the tier 1 formats a little bit, but they're better than tier 2. These are just decks that have potential, and going forward, they could be better depending on people finding new builds and stuff. Tier 2, these are decks that are better than Rogue, of course, but they are decks you will definitely be seeing at the middle and even lower tables at your regionals. These are just decks that can still compete in this format. They just struggle against some of the better decks. Rogue, I don't need to explain Rogue, obviously. And don't bother. Again, don't need to explain this. These are decks that realistically you shouldn't just not play this format. They're just either not that great or they're just not that great. So we're going to, of course, start with a deck close to my heart, my favorite deck of all time, Branded. And this is pure Branded. As you can see, we have some Chimera stuff here. But we're going to start with pure Branded Despia, and we're going to have to say tier 2. This is still a very strong deck, and I think with the banning of Arise Heart, it is a lot better, because they don't really mind banishing their resources, but they kind of want to do it on their own accord, and also they shuffle that stuff back into the deck. But I still think it's just a deck that can't really compete, especially when we get to later installments of this tier list video. It's just a deck that is going to be... how do I say it? You're going to still see pure Branded at your regionals. You're going to see it at nationals. It is still a very strong deck. Branded Fusion is one hell of a card. But it's just not able to keep up. It's a deck that it's a very tight deck. It doesn't have a lot of room for out of engine, and we are, as of right now, in a format that kind of requires you run a lot of hand traps, not just for your opponent's turn, but for your own turn as well. That's why you see a lot of Branded decks right now going 50 plus cards, because they're, of course, main decking all this extra stuff, plus Crossout, plus Dark Ruler No More, Triple Tactics Thrust. They have all this stuff in an already tight deck. And I think because of that, the deck does lose a little bit of its consistency, because you're seeing a lot less of the cards that make the deck consistent. But yeah, so I'm saying tier 2. All my Branded lovers, y'all probably calling me a traitor right now, but that's just how it is. Now we're going to move on to the Chimera builds. So we have 3 variants. Age of Overlord, of course, introduced the Horus cards, and some people are experimenting with Chimera Horus, but we, of course, have the builds that have existed before Age of Overlord, which is Chimera Branded and Chimera Runic. Now, keep in mind, Chimera Runic, some builds do run the Branded engine, like 2 or 3 Branded Fusion, 2 Albaz. That can also be included into this, but it's not nearly as aggressive as just the regular Chimera Branded. I'm going to say Chimera Branded is in tier 1.5. I think this is actually the best form of the Chimera deck as of right now. The deck is just incredibly aggressive. It sets up very strong turn 1 boards, and it is very good at breaking boards on turn 2. Like I said, I just think this is the better form of the deck. It also, even with the Branded stuff, has a lot of flexibility for a lot of the hand traps that are going around in the deck, like Imperm, Ash Blossom, Nibiru, and the deck even can get away with running stuff like Crossout. The deck runs DD Crow, and also with the new fusion, the new Baphomet fusion come out, the deck is not nearly as fragile with its normal summons, because on an ideal hand, you would open like Baphomet and Sword Knight and Chimera Fusion, or a way to search it, and then you would fuse the Baphomet and the Sword Knight, summon out the new Baphomet. The new Baphomet will dump something. The old Baphomet will revive Sword Knight, and that way, if your Sword Knight still gets ashed, you still have your normal summon to hopefully continue plays. And also, not to mention, just the new fusion kind of makes hands a little less bricky, a little less risky. And the deck, like I said, runs Crossout Designator because it is a little fragile. But again, I think this is the best form of the deck. I would say tier 1, however, some of the other decks that are going to be in tier 1 kind of outpace this deck and just make it a little bit bothersome to play. Next, we have Chimera Horus. I am definitely in the minority in this, where I think the Horus engine is just not as great as everyone's hyping it up to be. I think the Horus engine is very clunky. I've done a lot of testing with Chimera Horus. I've done a lot of testing with like Horus in general, moving up to the release of Age of Overlord, and I just don't like it. So my opinion on this is going to be a little skewed compared to a lot of other people. Again, I'm the minority when I say this, but I think the Horus stuff is bad. The deck the engine revolves around the sarcophagus, which is only searchable via Imseti. There are 4 of the Horus monsters. If you get this part of the deck running, it's insane. But the problem is you either have to open the spell or you have to open Imseti. If you don't open that, you're going to struggle to get to it. And I just think that Chimera is not the best way to get to it. I think there are better versions of the Horus, the better decks that can run the Horus engine that can make it so that the engine's not nearly as clunky. But on top of that, the trap is also insane and it's not searchable. You can't use Thrust to search the spell or the trap because neither are normal spell or trap. And it just, again, it feels a little clunky in Chimera. That's my personal opinion. I would go as far to say tier 2 because it's still playable. I just don't think it is as good. I think, again, it is very clunky. As for the Runic Chimera, it's very good. It's very strong. It's a lot more passive than the normal Chimera plays. I think, personally, the Runic conflicts with the Chimera because you obviously don't run the Illusion Chimera that can attack 1,000 fucking times because you're not getting a battle phase. That being said, the Chimera stuff does set up some very tricky interruptions to play around, and on top of that, you'd have to play against some Runic. It's something. It's a very good deck. Again, I don't think it's as good as the branded version of the deck, but it is still very playable, and I think it's a lot better than the Horus. Again, I am the minority when I say I think the Horus stuff is not as good as everyone says it is. Whereas, like, the OCG, they have max C, so they can almost guarantee they're going to see the spell or the Imseti. But, again, that's my opinion. Dark World. Obviously, Danger Dark World. There's not a lot of other ways to play Dark World. Some people are playing with some, like, Dark World Horus. That's not that great because the spell card sends, it does not discard. So unfortunately, there's not any combo there. The Dark World stuff can draw you into the Horus stuff if you need it, but I think overall it's just not a good combo. Danger Dark World in general, with the banning of Arise Heart, this deck is a lot better. It's a lot more playable. The only thing it has to play around is Droll and Lockbird, which is falling out of the format, and D-Shifter, which is also falling out of the format because less and less decks that can run it are viable. That being said, because those cards still exist and some people are still siding them, and the next deck we're about to talk about runs the biggest cripple of that deck, I think Dark World is still a rogue strategy. I don't think it is tier 2. But if you take this to a regional and you don't play against Flu specifically, you probably have a very good chance of doing very well at the regional. It is just a very hard deck to interact with. If you choose to go first, you're going to get OTK'd. If you choose to go second, you're going to get hand looped, especially if you're not running Droll or Shifter. It's just a very hard deck to play against, but again, it just cripples. It becomes a vegetable if you get hit with one of those 2 hand traps, unfortunately. So yeah, I'd say as much as I love Dark World, it's still a rogue strategy at best. You take this to your locals, you're just gonna win, especially again with Arise Heart gone. Fluandereeze. Fluandereeze is definitely 100%, without a doubt, tier 1.5. This deck, despite being a deck that everyone knows what it does, it has not changed once since tier format. the deck just does good things. The deck is primarily normal summoning, which is a hard thing to interact against, and it banishes its resources when they leave the field. And then also they run stuff like Harpy's Featherstorm, Ryza, Apex Avian, and Empen. We're in a format right now where a lot of the top decks are Link Summon centered. And of course, if they Link Summon, they can't put them in defense, which means Empen just by default is really good. The deck also runs D-Shifter, which hurts a lot of decks. And it's just overall a very strong deck. Even though, again, it's a figured out deck, we know what it does, we still struggle to play around it. Now, with this card coming back into the format, there's a good chance we'll see Lancia come back, because if you use Lancia, this deck just struggles to exist. However, I don't foresee Flu being a justifiable reason solely to bring Lancia back. There are other cards coming into the format to play around Flu, like Spellbound is making a comeback. But overall, I think Flu is back and it's planning to stay for a while. So be ready for this deck. Again, I think it's definitely tier 1.5. I don't think it's one of the best decks in the format. That being said, it is definitely better than Chimera Runic. Fight me on that one. Sword Soul. Sword Soul, again, it's a deck that we have seen for a very long time. It has not changed. Its end boards look the same. Sword Soul, of course, did very well. Second place at Worlds. I'm pretty sure. I'm drawing a blank on who won Worlds. But Sword Soul, regardless, did very well at Worlds. And, D-Link won Worlds. Duh. But yeah, no, Sword Soul did very well at Worlds, but again, it's a deck that just can't keep up. Personally, in my personal opinion, because the deck is so figured out, because we all know where the end board is going, usually with like a Chi-Chao, a Barone, and a Blackout set. Because of that, we just kind of know what it's doing, what it wants to do, and it's just very easy to play around these days. So I think, honestly, it's not even Rogue. I'd go as far as say don't bother playing this in this format. That being said, I forgot to say this at the beginning of the video. This is all prediction. I don't know what the pros are going to figure out. Yes, I play this game very competitively, and I do know the game somewhat well, but I am by no means a professional. This is all just kind of prediction based off of a lot of what I've already know about what's coming out and what is already out. So take this all with kind of like a grain of salt. At this point, a lot of you have probably already clicked off the video, so most of you probably did not hear this disclaimer, even though we're, 15 minutes in the video already? Gold Pride Punk, again, it's a deck that's figured out. The deck doesn't have any support. There's some, like, decent stuff that you can do with this deck now that, like, the Diabellstar stuff is out. But I just don't foresee that making the deck any more viable than it already is. I'd go as far as to say don't bother. Maybe Rogue. I think it's better than Sword Soul by all means, but I don't think this deck's going to be making any headlines anytime soon. Heroes with a Rise Heart gone, a little bit more viable. You don't have to worry about your Malicious getting banished. You don't have to worry about your resources in general getting banished. I just don't see... You're going to see Heroes at regionals. You're going to see Heroes at your locals probably. You're going to see Heroes everywhere. Heroes is just a fan favorite deck. It's a fun deck. It's a cool deck. It's a playable deck. But I just don't foresee it, making any crazy toppings by any means. If it gets tops, it means it had a good pilot, and that's really what it requires. But I really don't got a lot to say about Heroes. Heroes is Heroes. It hasn't changed since the release of the Flame Wingman and Wake Up Your Elemental Hero. It's been the same. It's been doing the same stuff. That stuff is good. And it's very adaptable, but it's a rogue strategy for sure. Infernoble. I really don't know what to say about this deck because the only experiences I've had against this deck, I wasn't impressed. And moving into the next format, I still am not really that impressed. Now, I think one of the Infernobles is a level 1 fire, so like the Diabellstar stuff can search it, but I don't know if that's worth it. And again, my only experiences with this deck, I was not in the slightest impressed. I know it does well. It's cool. It's consistent. It does some cool stuff. but I'm just not impressed. I'm going to have to say bottom of tier 2 because it still gets toppings. It still does very well. It does better than some of these decks sometimes, but I just don't think it's going to be anything crazy by any means. I could be wrong because, again, I'm pretty sure one of the Infernobles is a level 1 fire, and the Diabell Stars love the level 1 fire. So, Kashtira. Now, of course, the image I am using here is the banned one, but Kashtira in general. Kashtira, although their boss monster is gone, although Unicorn is at 2, the rest of the deck is untouched. And the deck is still very strong. It can play a bunch of rank 7s, like Big Eye, Master of Blades. It can kind of do whatever Dragon Rulers were doing back in the day. But also, it can just put a bunch of big bodies on the board and just kind of create a presence. And that's really all it needs to do. I'd go as far to say Kashtira is still there. It still exists. Just because they don't have their walking macro doesn't mean it's by all means a bad deck. They, of course, can still do Shangri-Ira to block off some zones. You know, the old strategy before Photon Hypernova came out. It's still a very viable deck. Or I guess realistically before Mind Hacker got banned. That was the strategy realistically. But it's still a very viable deck, still very playable. I'd go as far as say better than Infernobles. Honestly, I think Pure Branded is still kind of like back here. I don't think I still don't think it really keeps up with Kashtira currently. No, I think it does actually. But yeah, that's just my personal opinion. I think Kashtira is still a very viable deck. I don't think by all means it's down in Rogue yet. It struggles. I don't think it's going to do amazing at like regionals and stuff like that, but it's going to do better than some of these other decks by all means. Because like, again, it just puts up bodies. It recycles those bodies very well. It banishes face down, which is a mechanic that's very valuable in today's age of Yu-Gi-Oh! So yeah, I think it's still a very viable strategy. Labyrinth. I think Labyrinth's going to tier 1. I've been coping on Labyrinth for a fucking decade, it feels like. Every time I do these fucking tier list videos, I say Labyrinth is tier 1, and then it does nothing impressive. That being said, Age of Overlord has that new Labyrinth monster that comes out, and I believe basically what it does is like it can set a trap turn 1, activate that trap the turn that trap is set, and then it can also summon itself from the graveyard when something else happens. I don't remember the specifics, but the card's crazy. The card's insane. So you could like Eradicator turn 1 essentially on your opponent. The card is actually crazy. So I'm gonna say it again. I don't even play Labyrinth, but I'm gonna say it again. Tier 1 Labyrinth. The deck's gonna be crazy. I can't wait to find out how wrong I am on this, because I do hate this deck. I hate this deck with a passion more often than not. Every time I play against it, I hate it more and more. And I lost to it at the regional. If I beat it, I would have gotten my invite. I'm just saying I'm a little salty, but again, I'm coping on a deck I hate. The Labyrinth tier 1. The deck just sets a bunch of traps. The furniture build is actually a lot less risky, loses to Duster a lot less because you can just set that stuff on your opponent's turn and then activate it on like your draw phase or whatever. You can do a lot of stuff with this deck now, and that new monster is crazy. So yeah, Labyrinth tier 1. Madolche, my all-time favorite deck. I think I said Branded was, but actually no, Madolche is my all-time favorite deck. I talked about this in my last video last week. I think Madolche is a very viable strategy again with Arise Heart gone because the materials are no longer getting banished. That being said, by no means is it amazing, but I definitely think it's like the best of Rogue. But there's also some just like really cool builds you can do with this deck that I think a lot of Madolche players are not experimenting with. But overall, it's a very good strategy. It's got really good turn 2 potential. It struggles with a turn 1 board, but overall the deck breaks boards, and that's really what you want to do right now. But again, I don't think it keeps up with a lot of these other decks. But if you took this to a regional, I promise you as long as you know how to play the deck, you will do very well. Manadium had some support in the set, and I'll be honest, I haven't really looked into it all that much. So I'm gonna base this ranking off my knowledge of the already existent Manadium, and under the impression that the new support is actually usable. It's actually good. So Vanadium was doing stuff. The deck loses to Nib, which I'm pretty sure, especially going into this next format, I think Nib is going to be very prevalent. And I think just overall, Vanadium is still playable, but we're going to say tier 2. We'll say top of tier 2. I don't think this deck is, well, you know, actually, we'll say it has potential. It's playable. It has potential. So tier 1.5, because like I said, I'm not overly familiar with the new stuff, so we're going under the assumption it's actually playable and usable and good. But Vanadium overall was a really good strategy. You know, you can just Calamity your opponent. You can set up a crazy board and Calamity your opponent. Crimson Dragon's a crazy card, and Calamity was not banned, and it's also a crazy card and just got reprinted in the Jack Atlas structure deck. So this deck is still crazy, but like I said, it loses to Nib every time. Imperm can hurt, Ash can hurt, as long as they are well timed, and all 3 of those hand traps are very prevalent in the current format. So, and like I said, this Age of Overlord format is basically the same format, but with some extra additions, because Age of Overlord really introduced engines instead of decks. So that's my personal opinion on that. Don't bother with Math Mech. Don't bother with Math. This deck does the same thing it's been doing for the last 6-7 months. It's doing nothing impressive. There's no new Link strategies or Cyber strategies that make this deck any more playable. So I just say don't bother. You know, you could argue it is Rogue, especially since Arise Heart is gone. Math Mech does like the fact that their 1 circular isn't getting banished. They do like the fact that they can get Super Factorial off without, you know, risking all their shit getting banished. But overall, I just still think don't bother here. It's a strong deck. It's a playable deck. You might do well at regionals with it. I just don't think it's worth it, personally. Nouvelles. So I put Nouvelles in here simply because they got released in Wild Survivors and they got support in Age of Overlord. They have pendulums alongside their rituals, and they also made a card from Dimension Force playable in the deck, which I think is weird. I love this deck. I have several collector's rares in this deck. I have played this deck. I have thoroughly enjoyed this deck. Don't bother. This deck is fun, it's playable, but there's one problem. It's a ritual deck. The problem with a lot of ritual-based decks is that they just need resources. The deck, when it first came out, Droll was very prevalent, so the deck struggled. Now, yes, Droll is falling out of the format, so it is a little bit more playable, but the deck has one gimmick. If any of the monsters are targeted by effects or attacks, they can, you know, tribute and move 1 rank up. The entire design of the deck is to get to Hungry Burger and Bale Grill. Bale Grill is a basically Dark Ruler No More for every card on your opponent's field. But overall, once your opponent figures out the gimmick the first time, they're not falling for it the second time. Again, I love this deck. It's a fun deck. But in my personal opinion, I don't think the pendulums are going to be any more viable. And my reason being, Shangira is just going to say no to your pendulum zones, which, again, I think Cashier is still a very viable strategy. Now, I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong, because I have this deck, and the new support is a common and a super, and also the Starlight is like $50 for the pendulum from Dimension Force, so this would be a fun deck if it actually became prevalent. I don't think it's going to. Don't bother. If you like this deck, go ahead and play it, but just know the risk you're taking. Talking about pendulums, I don't know anything on the support release for this deck. Exceed the Pendulum came out, which is like an upgrade to Beyond the Pendulum. I don't know anything on this deck, so here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to put it in don't bother. Now, my reason being is there are a bunch of people who are going to skip to the end of this video, and they are going to see that I put Pendulum in the don't bother. Now, if any of those people that skip to the end of this video play Pendulum, they're going to wonder what the fuck my reasoning was. And it's simply because I don't know anything on this deck. I'm putting it in Don't Bother just simply for the clout. I don't, I really don't know anything on this deck. I know stuff on Pendulum. I don't know anything on the new support on if it's actually good in the deck. So we're just gonna put it in the Don't Bother. That's my reasoning. So sue me. We got Runics. I don't know why, or not Runics. We got Plunders. Plunders is one of my all-time favorite decks. Very fun deck. I've played the Adventure package. I've played the Runic package. I've played the Adventure Runic package. It's a very fun deck. The deck can do something that's going to be very strong in this format, and I think I haven't been talking about it nearly enough in this video so far. And it's something that Madolches can also do. So the fact that I just kind of kept ignoring this, Plunders can make Abyss Dweller, and so can Madolches. So, and that's going to be very important moving into this format, because we have a little certain something down here that you really want Abyss Dweller in your deck. We're going to see the absolute existence of Abyss Dweller going into this format, and any deck that can make it is going to be immediately playable, usable, and that does matter. That being said, I just think Plunder Adventure, between the two packages, Plunder Adventure is a lot better right now. I think a lot of decks right now pay off by being a lot more aggressive and over defensive moving into this, upcoming format. That is, I think in the current format, aggressive and defensive were fine, but I think post Age Overlord, aggressive is a lot better, and that the Plunder Adventure package can do that. Plunder Runic, of course, plays the defensive, controls the board, and I think because of that, it is still tier 2, but it's not going to be as good as the Adventure Plunder. Like I said, this is a deck that you can take to your regionals and you're gonna perform. Plunder anything is just, it's a good deck. I think nobody really expects Plunder, and then when they get hit with it, they're just kind of like, oh shit. Now the problem with this deck is a big prevalent problem. It loses to Ash, and it can lose to Imperm. Every one of the Plunder Extract monsters can be Ash Blossomed into Oblivion, and they can also be Impermed if the Imperm is timed properly. And both those cards are very prevalent in the current format. So that is that. Both Pearly forms. So Pearly as the hand trap version. I have two different here. Pearly is the hand trap version. So this is the Pearly version of the deck that's running all the hand traps, and then they're hoping they +6, and then they draw all the hand traps, into their opponent's turn. I think that is the better form of the deck going forward as of this moment. But that being said, there is another form of the deck that is coming up, thanks to several pro players experimenting with it, and then also on top of that, Arise Heart is banned, so these discard engines can be playable. So Pearly Dark World, or like Pearly Shadal, these are just decks, these are versions of the deck that have discard engines that also replace themselves. So I've seen some Pearlies with discard engines of like Grapha, Rainbow, Silva, so that way like you can discard the Silva specials itself, discard a Rainbow, search Grapha, and then Rainbow replaces the Silva, puts Silva back in the deck. Or you could run Brow and Snow. Snow will replace itself with Brow. Brow will draw a card. Or you could run Shadal Hedgehog and Shadal Beast. Hedgehog will replace itself. Beast will draw a card. It's a very strong discard engine, very playable. I just think in terms of the two versions of the deck, it's a little less playable, because we just want a lot of disruption moving into this next format. That's my personal opinion, but Pearly definitely tier 1, and then the discard version of the deck could be tier 1. We just have to see further play going forward. Rescue Ace. Diabell, the Diabell stuff is going to make this deck insane. It did in the OCG, and just the deck's crazy. The best ways to hit this deck, of course, is Ghost Mourner, Effect Veiler, and Imperm the Turbulence. You can do some well-timed Ash Blossoms. Ghost Spell can hurt the deck a little bit. Overall, the deck is able to push through and do some crazy stuff. It has crazy OTK potential, and just overall can control the board very well. And like I said, the Diabell Star stuff searches out Hydrant. Basically, there's just 1,000 ways to search Hydrant in this deck now, which is the card that gives all the Spell and Trap cards a bonus effect. So overall, it's just a lot better going forward, and it's going to be tier 1 for sure. The only thing that the deck is going to struggle with, that it doesn't struggle with in the OCG, is the lack of Max C. But I don't think that's going to be the biggest downside that some might think. Rika. Rika I think's potential. Rika is a crazy deck. Doesn't particularly like formats where there's a lot of hand traps running around. Man, I just cannot talk today. Does not like a lot of formats where the hand traps are just everywhere, and that just appears to be the format we're in. However, the deck is still somehow doing very well, and I think it's going to continue to do well as long as it has good pilots behind it. I think the deck is just incredibly strong. Other than that, I don't really have anything else to say about Rika. I hate this deck, I really do. So I'm glad I had very little interaction against it. But yeah, I think the deck still has very good potential moving forward. Dragon Link, I think Dragon Link's still crazy. Magnuma and Chaos Space getting put to 1, I don't think really affected this deck as much as everyone thought it would. And I mean, you all saw me post ban list, tier list video talking about this deck still is crazy. The issue this deck is going to struggle with is the fact that Flu is in the format, meaning that Link monsters just can't do their thing. They can't exist. And that is something that D-Link is going to have to struggle with. However, D-Link can very easily play around M-Pen. And I think the deck is still insane. It has really good potential. I'm just curious to see how it does going in against the other tier 1 decks, or how it goes against the tier 1 decks. Salad, I think Salad's tier 2. I don't think Salad is as good as we all thought it was going to be with the new support and Gazelle coming to 3 and a Rise Heart getting banned. Everything kind of stacked to make Salad a really good deck, and then somehow it still wasn't a really good deck. It's playable. It's better than Rogue for sure. I just don't think it's amazing by any means. You're gonna take it to locals. You're gonna take it to your regionals and stuff like that, and you're gonna play well. You're gonna probably get a good placing. You're gonna do well, and that's really all there is to it. But you take this to any severe high level of play, and you face off against any of these higher decks, and you're gonna struggle. So there's that. So I have Diabell Star here, but this image is primarily for the new archetype, the Snake Eye deck. And that deck, don't bother. The Diabell Star engine, so like the Sinful Spoils, the girl herself, and like the spells, that's a good engine. Like I said, we're gonna see it in Rescue Ace. We're gonna see it in just some other stuff. But as a deck, don't bother. I don't think the deck as a whole is all that great. I just think that the stuff that lets you search out the level 1 fire is going to go crazy. And like that's another reason I think Salad's also playable still. But then again, I don't know if Salad has a level 1 fire. I'm not overly familiar with Salad as a whole and like their specific details. I know what the deck does, but I don't know the levels and stuff. But I know they're all fire. I do know that. We have Sprite and we have Runic Sprite. Runic Sprite, I think, is a really good tier 2 deck. This also could be like Runic Furhire, which is the more common form of the Runic Furhire Sprite right now. Is more common form of like Runic Sprite is Runic Furhire Sprite, which that being said, like is probably the best tier 2 deck right now, possibly tier 1.5. But again, it's a deck we kind of have figured out. Sprite is more of an engine now. So because of that, like if you play pure Sprite, don't bother. Really don't bother. This deck, pure Sprite is kind of just, we know what it does. Again, I think Sprite is more of an engine, whether you're playing Tri-Brigade Sprite, you're playing Runic Sprite, Runic Furhire Sprite, any other deck that can run Sprite, it's just an engine. I don't think this is a deck that you can run solely on its own anymore. And if you do, you're playing it at locals. Again, just kind of how I've been looking at the deck. So I'd say don't bother if you're playing like just pure Sprite. Synchron, definitely a rogue deck. The problem with Synchron, so like Synchron's entire goal right now is to set up Baron to protect the junk speeder, and that's a good strategy. But if they can't do that, then they're just kind of saying YOLO when they activate junk speeder. It's a deck that can cripple under too many hand traps that are currently in the format. The deck can cripple under Ash or Imperm or Veiler or Ghost Mourner. The deck can cripple under Nib, and all at the same choke point. It all comes down to junk speeder, and I think that one card being the biggest cripple of the deck makes the deck just incredibly hard to play, but also incredibly just unplayable in general. That being said, the deck does better than some of these decks in the Don't Bother, because at the end of the day, you still need to have those hand traps to stop them from doing that, but you also need to have technically 2 of them if they have Baron on the board. So just personal opinion on that. Now we all have the elephant in the room here. This is the one everyone's been waiting for. You don't give a fuck about the rest of this list. I guarantee you 90% of you skipped to this point in the video. Tearlament. We have Tearlaments as like a pure form, and we have Tearlament Horus. There's also some people experimenting with Tearlament Diabellstar. I don't think it has nearly enough play to really judge it right now, because you can technically search out like Jet Synchron and do more of a synchro-based Tearlament play. But again, not enough not enough people have really talked about it for me to really judge it at the moment. So we're just going to talk about the 2 more common forms, Pure Tier and Horus Tier. I think Tier is the best form to be running the Horus stuff, because you can mill the Horus stuff instead of having to send stuff from your hand, but you could also do the Sarcophagus to send the tier names from your hand to get more milling effects. There's a lot of synchronicity there. My problem is that at the end of the day, it's my same argument with the Chimera Horus. You have to have the spell card, because if you're running 3 of the spell, inevitably, because you want to see it, but there's just those games you don't see it in your opening hand, and then those same games you have the chance of just milling all 3. And unfortunately, which is crazy to me, you don't have a way to get the spell out of the graveyard, back out of the graveyard. Once it's there, it's basically stuck there, unless you have some crazy goo I don't know about. So I think like the Horus version of the deck is certainly a 1.5. It has potential, and I'm intrigued to see where people take it. Especially seeing as in the OCG, the deck is Commander now, so you have like the Horus stuff, and then they can run 3 Max C, so they're gonna see the Horus stuff. But in the TCG, we don't have Max C, and a lot more of the names are at 3, Rhino Heart and the Field Spell being those 2 cards. But overall, I don't see this deck being as good as the pure version. Tearlament as a pure version, I think is the best version of the deck right now. Tier 1, 100%. The deck just, it does a lot. If you don't have Abyss Dweller on the field or D Shifter, you're gonna have a bad time playing against this deck, because you're gonna watch them play Solitaire while you're just playing Yahtzee on your phone. You're gonna let them pop off. You're gonna look at the clock and realize there's 10 minutes left in the duel, and it's still game 1. And then you're gonna struggle because they just have a really strong board. Now, the deck, again, it is a little bit weaker. It does have a lot less names to work with, and it doesn't always end on its ideal end board, but is still a very consistent deck. Like I said, I think the Horus version is the weaker version of the deck at this current moment. But again, this video is just a prediction video, and my personal experience with the Horus engine is not a great one. TG. Again, I don't know anything on this deck. I know Hyper Librarian draws you 1,000 fucking cards, and that's why he's at 1. But I don't know nearly enough of this deck, so we're putting him in we're putting TG in Don't Bother. Honestly, we're gonna say Rogue, because I have seen some people talking about this deck saying it is a lot more playable with the new support. But I don't know enough about the support to justify if this is going to be an incredibly playable deck. So we're gonna say Rogue. Again, a lot of this for the clout. We want to get those people, those TG fans, attention and be like, whoa, hold on, why is my favorite deck down in Rogue? This deck's gonna be insane, excuse you. But I don't know nearly enough on this deck to really give an honest opinion. I know that the current version of the deck is bad. Whether the new stuff makes it meta-defining is to be seen. Unchained, I think Unchained's still tier 1. I think Unchained is going to have a lot more competition going forward because it does struggle against Tearlament and Rescue Ace and arguably Labyrinth. But I think it's still going to have a very prominent space in the format. And not to mention, it's something I haven't talked about once, and I should have talked about it with Pearly. SP Little Knight is in the game, and you know damn well Pearly and Unchained are going to be running it. And honestly, even Tier. Like, all these decks in the top can run it. Arguably even Labyrinth, even though they rarely touch their extra deck. They're all going to be able to run it, and the card's insane. The end board for Unchained is most likely to be like Yama, Caesar, and or Little Knight. If they can manage it, they're going to try it. And it's going to be an even harder end board to break. So I think Unchained is still absolutely a tier 1 deck. And then our last one, the Vanquished Soul. Vanquished Soul is, for the longest time, still been around. I'd say a lot of people are saying this deck is trash now, but yet I still see it doing very well. It's just consistent. It just struggles with the fact Max C isn't in this format. With the new support, there's some stuff you can do here. The new support, I believe, is a fire, and both effects you have to reveal a fire. So you could arguably run like the Diabellstar stuff to search out like Jet Synchron or something, and then you have a fire in your hand. Or something like that. I don't remember. I think it's special summons a fire. Never mind. But no, there's some stuff you can absolutely do with the new support. I want to say we'll put it at the bottom 1.5 because I think the new support gives the deck potential for sure. But yeah, so that is my post Age of Overlord tier list prediction. We will, of course, in like 2-3 weeks maybe, do an actual tier list talking about what the format actually did become after Age of Overlord. But these are more of just predictions going forward to see how things are going to play out. If you liked this video, or, you know, if you had some disagreements or discrepancies or concerns, comments, definitely leave a comment down below on your opinion or how much you disagree with my opinion. And like I said at the beginning of the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. We just broke 1,500 subscribers, and I would love to keep that train going and maybe break 2,000 by Christmas. And then I've also been trying to upload shorts, so definitely give those some more love. I only upload one a week at the moment, but maybe in the future we get some more. But yeah, I'll see you all in the next video. See ya!